Unsurprisingly, I am back again, and for the second week running I'll be reviewing something fresh from the season just finishing up. This one is a show I actually completely hated when it first started up, but it grew on me quite a bit over time. The 25 episodes of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure were of course adapted from the first two arcs of the immensely popular manga series of the same name by Hirohiko Araki. This is by no means the first time JoJo's has been animated, but it is the first time we've seen a full-length series of it. It began airing in the fall season of 2012, was produced by David Production, never heard of them, was written by Yasuko Kobayashi and directed by Kenichi Suzuki and now Tsuda. Now are you ready for the quickest plot overview ever? This show is about heroes fighting villains. That's about it. Well actually, there's a little more to it than that. Just a little though. So this one is an adaptation of the first two parts of the manga, which is currently up to 8 parts. The first 9 episodes cover Phantom Bloods, and the latter 16 cover Battle Tendency. Each part has a different character called JoJo as its protagonist. So Phantom Blood starts up in England in the year 1887 with a 12-year-old Jonathan Joestar in the driver's seat. When JoJo was a tiny baby child, his parents were involved in an accident which killed his mother, and during this incident his dad mistook a looter named Dario Brando for his saviour. So once Dario later passes away, as thanks for this incident, his son Dio is adopted into the Joestar family. And when Dio shows up, he acts like a complete prick and ruffles JoJo's feathers. 7 years on, everything goes pear-shaped when Dio's true plans get unveiled, and JoJo's all like, "We'll have none of that, sonny. We'll have none of that." Then from this point on, the story is based around this mysterious stone mask in the Joestar estate and the power it grants those who use it. As well as like, JoJo learning to use strange powers, and lots of fighting. JoJo versus Dio, effectively. And Battle Tendency takes place in the 1930s during World War II. This time our hero is Joseph Joestar and he is Jonathan's grandson. He too has lost his parents because that's how it is in all fiction ever, right? He's being raised by his grandmother and Speedo Wagon, who was the first JoJo's bestest mate. Then the plot falls onto the origin of the stone mask from part 1 and stopping these crazy scantily clad Egyptian looking chaps who jumped out of a stone pillar from getting some powerful stone and ruling the world, I guess. There's training and stuff in there too, and this JoJo has a fabulous sidekick called Caesar. But again, it's learning to use strange powers and lots of fighting. JoJo and Caesar versus the Pillar Men, effectively. Right then, so the power all the good guys use is the ancient art of mystics known as the Ripple. And what exactly is the Ripple exactly? I've got no idea. So apparently it's something to do with nature, and they say it comes from the sun, and the only real rule you're given is that you have to breathe in order to channel a ripple, but from there on it's just, I don't know. It's this show Shonen Shout Your Attack Name Fighty thingy basically, and the only real explanation to it given when they use it is like, because the Ripple. How did he just use a glass of wine as a zombie radar? Because the Ripple. How exactly did he just squirt snake venom out of the wounds in his face? Because the Ripple. How did he make a bird fly out of that woman's mouth? Because the Ripple. How exactly did that man just make a hang glider out of leaves? I think you've gotten the gist of it. Because the Ripple. It is all rather ludicrous, so don't expect anything logical to happen whatsoever. It's not just a lack of explanation on what the Ripple is, everything that happens is ludicrous. Speedwagon thaws frostbite with nothing more than his manly chest. JoJo breathes a bubble of air underwater. And severed heads talk. Oh, and not just that. A severed head actually managed to use the Ripple once. And the only enforced rule of Ripple was needing to breathe. How exactly can a severed head breathe? You need lungs for that, right? So yeah, before you start watching, leave all logic and reason in another room of the house, or just dispose of them entirely. Beyond that, I don't think there's much I can really comment on. It's very simple stuff, and I can say it certainly feels like the show has achieved exactly what it set out to. One thing I can say though is that I thought Battle Tendency was a fair bit more enjoyable than Phantom Blood. The main reason being that Phantom Blood was split into 4 separate arcs with a few time skips, which over a mere 9 episodes felt a bit jumbly-bumbly to me. Whereas the 16 episodes of Battle Tendency have a more consistent flow to them as a single story. I also thought the villains in Battle Tendency were far more interesting, so I think I'll talk a bit more about the characters now. Starting with your Part 1 exclusives. Dio Brando, though filling his role perfectly, was one of the most cliché villains I've ever come across. The guy is just an evil, arrogant bellend with huge world-ruling ambitions. It's as simple as it gets, which is obviously what they're going for, but in the end there's just nothing to him. Gotta love his catchphrases though. Muda, 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 muda! Hinjaku, hinjaku! Then our hero in the first part, Jonathan Joestar, was entertaining to say the least. He's this huge honourable advocate of justice and an all-around very naive chap. He acted like a top-notch gent from start to finish, and the effect this had on certain conflicts was highly amusing. The main chap who teaches JoJo rippled powers from the get-go is this bloke called Will Zeppeli. He's not really a huge part of the story, but he's a pretty cool guy and has all these interesting quirks that make him fairly memorable. And there's one main character who shows up in both parts, and his name is Speedwagon. He's Jonathan's right-hand man for most of part 1 and acts as an uncle figure to Joseph when he's an old man in part 2. He's a charismatic eccentric, adds some comedic value occasionally, but his role rarely feels all that important. Moving into part 2, the latter of the two JoJo's, Joseph is a young brute with very little in common with his grandfather. He's cocky, hot-headed, ill-mannered, loud and impulsive. He's also a pretty proud and arrogant guy, and he absolutely makes for an incredibly engaging protagonist. He displays certain mannerisms when he's fighting that make already absurd combat even sillier, and I thought he was brilliant. And as I mentioned earlier, unlike his granddad, Joseph is not alone in his adventure. Caesar Zeppeli is the grandson of the other Zeppeli I mentioned from part 1. He basically fills a secondary protagonist role during battle tendency, as he doesn't really feel like a sidekick. He pretty much stands on the same footing as JoJo, but gets less screen time. I think the relationship between him is one of the things that sets part 2 ahead of part 1. This is down to the two of them being very similar in their abilities, pride and arrogance, but very different in the way they present themselves. Because unlike JoJo, Caesar is more refined and reserved, and this leads to a relationship full of conflicting ideals and mutual respect. These two also have a teacher, and she goes by the name of Lisa. Yep. She was great. Pretty much a perfect shonen mentor character. She has an aura of strict authority and power, but also feels kind of loving and motherly to her students in a way too. 2 stories in one means more characters to talk about than usual. I'll finish up now though with our battle tendency villains. So the Pillar Men go by the names of AC/DC, Wham and Cars. That in itself is pretty fantastic. I won't go into much detail on them, but they all have their own sets of quirks and ideals, which I felt made them a lot more entertaining than Dio with his one-dimensional evilness. Their power is made clearly noticeable, and they work great as final boss figures for the show. Nothing groundbreaking here, just villainy villains doing villainy things. I think that's everyone. Yeah, certainly a varied bunch. Nobody stood out as being all that incredible a character, but in the confines of the story we are given, they all did their job marvellously. They're all eccentrically designed too, everyone looks so over the top and colourful. There's also the matter of the ridiculous muscle to body ratio these guys have going on. It's pretty obscene actually. You see, I'm used to massive biceps and offensively large shoulders in this genre, but I think it goes overboard when your characters have thighs larger than their abdomens. Not gonna lie, this show is pretty ugly to look at if you concentrate on it. Everything looks completely over the top, and don't get me wrong, it works, but it's still ugly. There's a lot of weird shine and bizarre textures used, and I rarely saw a background in battle that was anything more than that effect that goes whoosh! And the animation quality was alright, I suppose. I did notice a few bits of really iffy CGI, but nowhere near as much as I was expecting after the sheer amount of it in both openings. In the end, everything looked as the show felt. Entirely and astonishingly over the top and garish. Similarly, everything sounded entirely and astonishingly over the top and garish. The voiceover was loud, and almost every character had an obnoxious tone to their voice in some way or another. The sound effects used were exactly the same, loud and irresponsibly noticeable. Now, both opening songs were absolutely fantastic and matched the tone of the show perfectly. And though similarly over the top and ridiculous, I wasn't sure if some of the background music fit with what was going on. Is this dubstep really appropriate music for a Roman chariot battle? Might be, I don't know. However, what I do know is that's about all I have to say about this most recent adaptation of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I may have said a fair few negative things about it, but the important question is, did I enjoy it? The answer to that being, absolutely. It was a ludicrous, obscene cavalcade of over-the-top fighting, and once in a while that is exceptionally entertaining. It is in no way a show to go into with a serious mindset. You see, I did when it first started, and I absolutely hated it until I realised I was watching it wrong. Is it something I would want to watch again? Not really. But do I want to see them animate Stardust Crusaders and all the parts beyond that? Yup. Really, just yes. I certainly rated Battle Tendency higher than Phantom Blood, but overall, I give the show a warm 61%, and a recommendation to those who want some mindless fun. And for those out there wondering if this is a decent adaptation, if you're a fan of the manga, I haven't actually read it myself, but everyone I know who has thinks the show's great, so you'll probably feel the same as they did. So from me, I'll be looking forward to it, so see you next week.
JoJo's speed the walk down.